Welcome to the 20 Years of Morrowind podcast. Morrowind is a shared journey that we took on our own, and today we will discover one such journey. My guest today is Gnomey, who is a Tamriel rebuild lead dev. Welcome on in.
Yes, I'm Gnomey, and it's nice to be here. And hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
It's my pleasure.
And I have but one question for you, but it's a big question. Essentially, I'm curious about you, Morrowind, and your life. So can you tell us a little bit about your Morrowind journey, how it started, where it took you, and everything that goes with that?
I actually started playing Morrowind pretty soon after it came out, but I didn't realize it. I was very young at the time. I forgot how young, as in something like 13 or something. I could do the math, but I know doing math in the sort of recordings is always a bad idea, so something like that.
Smart.
And I started playing actually with my brothers, and originally I thought the game was just set in Sedanine. I thought that was all there was to it. And so we did the typical thing, we were sort of playing together as a group. We made our characters terrible builds, died to everything, died to a rat, thought we'd go into the water, died to a slaughterfish, died to a mud crab. And then we figured out we could, and I tried to convince my brother who was playing at the time to go to that big threatening giant flea thing, just that maybe that would take us somewhere else. We ended up in Balmora, and that's sort of where the world opened up.
Mm-hmm. It's like a whole new game after the Sedanine simulator, the Balmora simulator.
And then, of course, beyond that, there's also another thing where my brother tried to take the Silver again, then ended up in Eldrune and was in the middle of an ash storm, and they sort of fumbled into an interior and then ran to an Argonian, and we thought, oh, there's this weird desert place with lizards. Always the first memories of Morrowind where you don't really have an impression of the game and you form these weird images. And so that's sort of where that world opened up, and then we found out about the construction set. That was a whole new other world, of course, and then we started messing around, doing some quite crazy things with, armies of skeletons and I don't know what. And actually somehow managed to do some pretty complex scripting early on. I don't know how that happened. I'm terrible at scripting. I don't try and touch it, but yeah. And then that eventually got me sort of, looking into mods. And I actually originally, the first community that I came into contact with was Fliggity's Morrowind mods, which became Great House Fliggity's.
Mm-hmm, of course.
I was interested in the Blasphemous Revenants, I think, or in one of his mods. I wanted to play it. And at the time, you had to register to the site to be able to download the mods. And so then I wrote, message there saying, I probably wouldn't, in the forums saying I probably wouldn't post much, but hello. And then I ended up being one of the most prolific posters in that place, I think, yeah. And the things that at the time I didn't have Blood Moon, and so, couldn't really, also didn't really have MWSE. And so then I basically was trying to make Fliggity's very complex mods work without Blood Moon and MWSE, which was again very ambitious because I was very young. But I was involved in that community, and then there are of course a lot of modders who I see still around, in all sorts of other places, were in that community, and so a lot of projects came up, like Lithodonia, for instance, which I'm probably mispronouncing.
Melchior Dark.
Yeah, and then one of them that came up was Silgard Tower. And somehow looking into Silgard Tower, I ended up finding out about Tamriel built, and I saw the screenshots of stuff that's now long since been redone, of course. That really impressed me, and then I joined there. So,
yeah, I don't know if people know just how long Tamriel Rebuilt has been a project.
that's it started before Morrowind came out. It started in 2001. It's older than Morrowind. It was actually last year's anniversary.
How did it begin before Morrowind came out?
It's because basically there was the announcement that it wouldn't be all of Morrowind, that it would just be Vattenfall. And then on the old Bethesda forums, Ender was the sort of founder of the project. He said that, they also announced that the construction site was being made. And so then Ender said, okay, we want to then recreate the rest of Morrowind. And they started planning out the project before the game was out.
Wow.
Yeah, it had started in the Bethesda forums, but it's been now 21 years later. Of course, there's so many transformations that happened for the project.
Yeah, it's true. Like Tamriel rebuilt, it sort of goes through cycles. Like we make a region, we make another region, we make a region, then we go back to the first region and improve on that, and then the next, adding new regions as you go along.
Yeah, and that is also the with the infamous Silgar Tower Tamriel rebuild split. If people aren't
Go
aware,
ahead.
so
I'm taking my popcorn. I'm ready.
Tamriel rebuilt. So originally had the idea of recreating Morrowind, and then because people were just really ambitious and wanted to do everything, but then suddenly became, creating the whole province, which is why it has that name. But they started with Morrowind, and they just went wild, just letting people grab bits of land and just make them. It was the original idea of Tanriel built was a bit more of the sort of community project where people just make these areas and then they get stitched together, and then that will be the release, and so it's all, you go from one area to the next, walk over the cell, and you're in a completely different type of world, It's a completely different modder, a completely different approach. And then there were sort of groups that formed, and one of them was already the Silgar Tower group, which was a very large one that had a lot of Western Morrowind. And so it was handling that side of TR. And it had all sorts of, fantastic things with, huge cities, statues everywhere, all sorts of architecture sets. You have the imperial walls and forts, and you have Redrun buildings in there, and just tossing everything together, and guards walking around in ebony. And already early on, there were the people in TR who wanted to sort of be very consistent. And so they started to say, maybe this should be changed. And so they said that one important city, Silgar Tower, that was built as a really massive lava place, but it was deep in Redrun land. And so they said, no, this should be redone as Redrun. But that's one of the stories, at least. This is way back in the past and isn't quite sure what happened.
It's part of the legend.
Yeah, but that basically caused a huge rift between the Silgar Tower and the sort of more grounded Tamriel rebuild. And Tamriel rebuild's forum was hosted on the Silgar Tower side at the time, and then one of the Silgar Tower people basically deleted the forum. And so, yeah, there were a lot of strong feelings at the time, but when I joined here, that was already sort of in the past. You could still tell there were some people who were a bit more over it, and some people who still had their resentment. So. Yeah.
I'm guessing the drama, I call it drama, but that's part of dealing with a large team of people, a large team of passionate people, no less.
And it's also, you have a volunteer project like Tamriel built that's gone on for 20 years. But a lot of new people come in, and a lot of old people, have some sort of commitments or whatever, for whatever reasons, drift out of the project. And so the project changed over time, and there were times where it was, quite turbulent. There were a lot of people had very strong ideas of what Tamriel should be, who clashed constantly, and you got big arguments and those things. And then there were other times where just, everyone just, got along smoothly, and there were no real arguments, and it was very strange in that other way. And yeah, and I mean, at the moment it's really going surprisingly well. One would think it would be dwindling with a 20-year-old game, but really the community seems to be doing really well in general, and with Tamriel built, that's true too. There are a lot of members, and I think also not too bad in terms of tensions and so on at the moment either. It's a good time to join.
We will talk about that for sure. You say there's a lot of modders, which brings the question, like, what do people do? Because we talked about the construction set, but you don't need to use the construction set to be a modder.
Yeah, and that's the thing that also with Tamriel built, I suppose in a way picking up the history of it, that it originally wanted to recreate all of Tamriel. And then when Oblivion came out, it scaled that back to Morrowind. So we're just doing Morrowind.
Just.
Yeah.
Air quote, we're doing air quote. We're just doing Morrowind. That's 3 times the size of the original game.
I mean, you do have the sister project, Project Tamriel, which is trying to create the rest of Tanriel. Mm-hmm. So they're quite ambitious, of course. When Oblivion came out, there was the decision that we do 1 province per game at the time, and so we had the Hammerfell province. And I was really excited about that. But of course, I was very young, I didn't have that many games. I already mentioned I didn't have Blood Moon when I started modding TR even. And I didn't have Oblivion when I wanted to get involved in the Hammerfell project. And so what I started out doing is that I was very involved in discussions, and that's, still today, if you go to TR, you can be involved in discussions. You don't need to be a developer first or whatever to have your opinion. And I also contributed concept art, and it wasn't very good concept art to start with. It was sort of, messy pencil sketches that I badly tried to clean up in Photoshop and didn't really work out too well. But I improved the art a lot, contributing to TR actually, and there are those sort of things you can get in right away. Also, if you are a modeler, for instance, you can also just start contributing models, getting feedback, or doing texture work, those sort of things. And writing, those are all things that you can do without having to somehow, showcase or whatever, or get familiar with the construction set.
So as long as you're passionate about Morrowind, there's a way you can contribute, if only talking with other people.
Exactly, and in general, that's also outside of TR with talking with other people. If you want to pick up certain skills, there are just so many people in the Morrowind community who are just so helpful, who if you're having a problem with something, will point out what you're doing wrong or will try and figure out the problem. And so, for instance, with modeling, that was always a difficult hurdle, both very noticeable in TR, but also, again, the more broader community, that you had the modelers who could really make new things, who could make new clothing and new equipment, those sort of things. And it was often quite a small amount. We also had a few more who did retextures, which was a bit easy to get into, but with fully new models, there were a smaller amount really specialized in that. Mm-hmm. The modelers really, and they can sort of see how they interact a lot, exchange tips, all those things, it's all very open. And now it's easier to get into modeling than ever, and there's really, with TR, it's been impressive how many new models we've been getting. Also things like new creatures, which used to be just
so hard.
Yeah, so hard. I mean,
with the animations.
Yeah, exactly. It's all becoming easier, also due to work with people like Greatness 7, who's just made immense contributions. You can't really overstate that now.
Greatness 7 is a genius because he's helping tons of people, models, animations, scripting, but he himself doesn't really publish mods. So he's not bothered by anyone, but he's helping tons of people. So shout out to him. Yeah. So if people actually do want to get involved with Tamriel Rebuilt, how does it work? What do they have to do?
I mean, the easiest way is just to hop into our Discord and to say you want to join. And then it's good to have an idea of what sort of things you're interested in doing. Mm-hmm. And things that you don't need any, and I know that there are some other projects where it's, as I think especially with Sky modding and that sort of thing, where people have portfolios that they hand in, and you sometimes get people joining TR who think they need that as well.
It used to be the case that you would have to have a really good mod showcase, and then if that was good enough, you could join the team.
And that's the thing, that for the construction set development, we're actually making plugins, we do still have the showcase process. you don't need to, and we don't expect anyone to ace the showcase, right away. You don't, submit something, then, oh yeah, that's perfect, you're a developer. Showcase is actually there to to get familiar with how TR works and to learn things. So we really just take you through it, as in that you can come in with zero experience. And then by the end, I can't really think of anyone who has failed a showcase. That isn't really what the process is about. It's about learning. It might be that there are some people who decided, no, I don't want to do this after all, and contributed in other ways, but you don't really fail the showcase. That's just pick up the skills, and it really goes surprisingly well. That if you, as in the easiest is probably making an interior, which is usually at Lalo House, and can do that quite quickly, or if it takes you a lot of takes, that's fine as well. There's no sort of limit there.
Good. So people go to the Tamriel Rebuild Discord, talk to people, and mod, draw, chat.
And it's just good to have an idea of really what grabs you, what you want to contribute to. It's also with, for example, when modelers and concept artists come in, they tend to have sort of strengths and weaknesses. There are some who, and also with preferences what they want to work on, that there are some people who really like working in architecture and they're very good at that, and there are other people who are a lot better with plants and more organic things like that. And so that's also a sort of good starting point to know what you want to contribute or what you want to work on. The TR site, I now say that there are a lot of tutorials and so on where you can just read up how to do things, and of course you can just talk with people, and there are a lot of ways to learn to do what you want to do.
What about you, actually? Did you pick up some skills working on or playing with Morrowind, creating mods, and then working with Tamriel Rebuild?
Yeah, with Tamriel Rebuild, I started out, I did make an interior showcase, so I did do a few interiors. I haven't actually made that many. I think some like a dozen maybe. Probably not that many actually. And I said the concept art was the other thing where I tried to contribute and got better over time. And then later on with TR, I also then went into exteriors, and so I've done a bit of work there as well. And more recently, I haven't done that much actually with exterior claims. I think I only completed one exterior claim. But I've done a lot of work on the on sort of broader files as a lead developer later. So with Roadir, for example, or Roadire, or however you want to call it, the Indril Stronghold in the Eltharion release. But that exterior and some of the interiors were what I made. And otherwise, one of the things I haven't really gotten into yet with TR is with questing, which I intend to at some point, make a showcase for that as well. Through the regular process.
I didn't catch what you said.
Questing.
Questing, okay. All right.
And I have, outside of TR, I've made a few sort of quest mods and so on. Usually, amusing enough, sort of overly ambitious projects as well there that unfortunately don't get very far.
Do you have any modding tips for people?
Yeah, and so one thing I'll say is that if you're interested in the construction set, it's sort of, in some ways it's simple, but it's really hard to get familiar with how to actually work with it. And there are a lot of very convenient things that a lot of people never know about. And so that's, for example, in the top menu you have, under the sort of edit drop-down, you have find text. Which is really good for either finding bits of dialogue or finding objects that you're looking for. That you can put in well and search for objects, and you'll see some wells. And then also search and replace. That's a really useful one too. One of my personal projects was where I was making an expansion for Calarun. The idea is that you get rid of Gothrin, and then you set up Fast Eddie as your mouth. And then I thought, okay, you give him Calarun, and then that expands like a player's stronghold. The problem is that I made it all with statics, and I realized, wait, exterior needs to be activators to work like the stronghold. You didn't know about search and replace. I thought, oh, I made this beautiful town. Now I have to delete it all and rebuild it all with activators. That's when I found out about the search and replace.
Invaluable, yeah. And the find text that you mentioned also super important, because for anyone who looked at the construction set, you have that long list of, especially statics, there's a lot of them, that long list of things, and sure, it says fern for furniture, but even then, if you're looking for a specific table, you're going to be browsing lines and lines and lines. Find text is going to save you time so much.
Yeah. So, those are all the sort of, useful tools you can find out about. And otherwise, in terms of modding in general, it's a sort of difficult thing because always have the very proper advice is that, start with something simple that's within your capabilities, and then you finish that, and then you try and build up from there. And that always seems like a very sensible way to do it.
Yeah, but in practice...
I've always just smashed my head against things trying to do something completely ridiculous and over-ambitious, which doesn't get done, and you just have to be aware of that probably won't get done, but you learn so much from that approach,
Also.
So I think that as long as you're fine with not getting finished with something that you're working on, I actually think that is a good approach, just launch into things, try something over-ambitious, ask people... things aren't working out, that sort of thing, and you can just learn a lot, but won't get too much from it to start with in concrete finished mod, but you'll get a lot of skills.
Yeah, for sure. How important nowadays, 20 years after the game and 21 years after the Tamriel Rebuild project started, how much of your time is dedicated to Morrowind, generally speaking?
I contribute to TR whenever I can, and just really enjoy doing it as well. And I still spend a lot of time with it. I have to say it's always a bit of the curse of a lot of modders, and certainly true in TR. I don't actually play Morrowind as much as I'd like, but I end up most of my playtime is spent as a tester around.
That was my follow-up question. It's a very common side effect of being a modder. You don't play the game as much.
But, that's why I'm, for example, interested in there was a new release of Morrowind multiplayer, for instance.
Recently,
and that interests me because that's also something that I can play with my brothers, and I always like to play games with them as well still.
That's so neat, especially when that's how you started as well. Now you can play the game together.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Have you played other titles in the Elder Scrolls series?
Yes, I have. I never really got into Daggerfall. I did try playing it. I managed to basically rush through the starting dungeon, just running through trying not to die.
Yeah.
I didn't get very far beyond that. It's sort of thing that's a pity, but it is in a way dated of a game for me, and I just couldn't really get into it, fortunately. But the later Elder Scrolls titles I've played as well, I did eventually get a copy of Oblivion, and did quite a bit of that. I have to say, unfortunately, and I did play a lot of it, but I'm not so enthusiastic about that game in the end. I didn't like a lot of the decisions it made. I also played a lot of Skyrim, and while Morrowind's still my favourite, I did enjoy my time with Skyrim. Good, and it's and the modding community there, of course. With Oblivion, there is still a modding community, and I think there's a bit of a revival, but it's only the smallest of the three, I'd say. But Skyrim's modding community also has a lot of really interesting things that are being developed, so that's nice as well.
So this year we'll be celebrating Morrowind's 20th anniversary. Are you ready for the nasty question? Do you think Tamriel Rebuilt will be done by the time Morrowind has its 30th anniversary?
Unfortunately, 30th anniversary, very easy to answer. No. It won't be done. It'll be further, yes.
Definitely.
It won't be done. So, I think one of the things that the developers always have to be very quick to say with interviews like this is that you can also play Tamriel rebuilt in its current state, and have the sort of two files, TR mainland, TR preview. TR preview is complete areas. If you go there, you will find doors that don't lead anywhere, all sorts of unfinished things. And so that's usually used more just to generate distant land or that sort of thing, or if you really just want to explore the unfinished content. But the TR mainland file, that is fully playable, and especially with the new releases, they have just a ridiculous amount of quests and so on that we frankly overextended, and we're trying now to be a bit more restrained with quests, that have the full sort of amount that Vanilla had, that you always have faction quests, those things. But there are some just really complex, long quest lines that you'll find in Old Ebonheart, in Almasthir, for instance, in the Antheran release. And you can have a lot of time just playing Tamriel Rebuilt in that state. But for Tamriel Rebuilt being finished, I'm afraid 10 years won't do it.
Yeah, and that's what we were saying at the beginning. Like, even once the whole of Morrowind is done, you'll just go right back and improve the first region, and then the next one. It's never going to be finished. It's always going to be improved.
And that's the thing, I think TR was basically finished in 2005 at the time. That they said, okay, we have the landmass done. And then some of the TR leads at the time, it used to be called the Core, they took a look at the areas, they ran around in the game, and they decided to basically start anew, basically that they said, we can't release this just isn't in a state that we're comfortable with, and so they did massive overhauls, and has sort of been in this snake eating its own tail cycle ever since, pretty much. But for that, the content has really expanded a lot, and Silgar Tower project, that did make its release, and you can play that, and that's actually quite similar to how TR was at that time, and I think it's still a fun project, but it's a very different approach and very different project to what Tamriel Rebuilt is now, and that's a sort of TR that it's now trying to be very consistent with the original game. Also, more recently, the idea was with the quests, but also with the exteriors, to not overdo it and not be far more, in a way, sort of impressive and excessive than the original game as well. Really just trying to hit that sweet spot of consistency.
Yeah, Silgar Tower is very, what modders like to say, is very 2000. That's how modding was in 2000. So yes, we would keep that, as you mentioned, Veteran architecture with Dwemer ruin and people running around in ebony and using Ashlander weapons. Like, it was like the bigger the better, and big purple lights everywhere, and that's and it's not bad. It's just that's how modding was. That was the trend.
There are a lot of areas where there's still sort of I suppose for the people who aren't that familiar with exterior modding, that you have the landscape textures, and then you have the vertex shading, which is usually just used to add shadow, make it look a bit more natural, that you also add it with transitions between textures to make them a bit smoother. And from those early days of modding to this day, TR has areas where we discover, sort of neon green vertex shading or teal or something, just in random places, and that's left over from that time, that people thought, oh yeah, bright colors everywhere, like this building from this set, and I like this building from this set. Just smash them together and toss statues on it, and perfect. And I mean, I do still enjoy those, it is, but it's a completely different approach.
part of the Morrowind history. It's true that nowadays, and I think not just with Tamriel Rebuilt, but a lot of mods, it's a lot more about that vanilla feel and keeping with the lore, and basically creating mods that could have been shipped with the game.
Yeah, exactly.
But better.
I mean, that's the thing, that's always where there's a bit of a difference of opinion, but I think some ways, if you look at the official plugins, for example, that Bethesda developers made, I think there was also a bit in that, 2000 Spirits, and with things like Fire Moth, does it make sense to have that archipelago or whatever? That didn't matter, it was just a cool place you go to, you fight skeletons, great stuff, and nowadays I agree that with a lot of projects and a lot of modders that they try to really be very consistent with original Morrowind. I think almost more than the developers really try to, even with expansions, where there are some differences to how the original game did things.
We've come a long way. And the best part is there are still more to come with projects like Tamriel Rebuilt and mods and Open Morrowind, also very exciting. So we'll have to wait another 10 years and see where that takes us.
Yeah, but I mean, the nice thing is that in those 10 years, there will be tons of new mods and releases for Tamriel Rebuilt and other projects to play, and also the fact that it's one of those things with, of course, such an old game. You can also play all the old mods as well, and you really just see some very different things than doing that. That really see all of the sort of changes that have gone through the community. Some things became popular at certain times, and that's even in TR. That's a fascinating thing. You can basically do archaeology with it, because you can tell if you look at an exterior or an interior. You can often tell more or less when it was made, because there were just certain things that were popular back then. That there was the stage where there were these massive cliffs, and people put massive cliffs everywhere. Then there were the stages where people had these groups of rocks, and lots of small rocks, and put those everywhere, so just had fields full of small rocks. And the Morrowind community as a whole, I think, went through a similar development with mods. There were sometimes with MWSE, for example, where that was making developments, and then there were a lot of really crazy mods that came out exploring those capabilities, and a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, mods that should have never existed. Like 10 years ago, if we had said, hey, do you think we could do I was speaking with Merlord earlier, do you think we could do like a grill, but to use it, you just put the meat on the grill, and people would say, no, get real, no can do, never gonna happen, hard-coded, not possible. And now it is. It's pretty exciting.
And also, of course, with Open Morrowind, that also opened up a lot of capabilities that is quite impressive with WSE, just how much it is able to do. And I suppose in the terms of the community, that is one of the nice developments now with Lua, where there's attempt to get them to really have similar capabilities. But, I think that was one of the sort of very difficult things in the case of the community, that you really have to make that choice between, am I going to play MWSE or am I going to play Open Morrowind?
There's only one correct answer, both.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to make choices. Yes, with MWSE you have incredible gameplay mods, like really amazing. With Open Morrowind, you can play on your phone, you can play multiplayer, you can play in VR.
That's the thing that I know that definitely with Skyrim Home of the Nords, I think TR has a few as well, but there are some areas that are created with sort of multiplayer in mind, and that you can complete them by yourself. That they were built in a way so that you can move around, and I think there's a bandit stronghold in Skyrim Home of the Nords, and then that was created specifically with the idea that you might be playing with other people, and that's a sort of interesting idea that shows the sort of interaction, for one thing, between, of course, different mods or projects, but then on the other hand, it's also I've never, when I started TR in 2006, you wouldn't have said, okay, I'm going to design this place to work with multiplayer. There wasn't a multiplayer. Who would have done that?
I think Mike the Liar talked about it.
Exactly.
There was a line in the game, like legit, this multiplayer topic, and Mike says no. I don't remember if he lies about it. I mean, if he said yes, there is, then he didn't lie, and if he said no, it's not possible, then he lied, as expected of him.
Also with, for example, creature development, again, you did have creatures early on. They were often a bit variable in quality, but I mean, it was still impressive. I wasn't complaining. It was impressive enough to have a creature moving about in the first place. But with TR, there are some really nice creatures that have been developed, and also I have seen development of, for example, a dragon, which a new dragon creature model, which is just being really well done. And there are other dragon models that are done. That's another of those things where I was of the attitude that things are interesting, but they don't really work in Morrowind, just due to some issues with how creatures act in the engine, and that they don't really move very smoothly through the room. They're treated as large cubes, basically.
Yeah.
Move around the space, and so there's a certain awkwardness to them. They always turn on the dime, that sort of thing. It is quite impressive nowadays what solutions people find to those sort of issues, and that features I didn't think could really be implemented well. But it looks like there might be a way to do that, and that's that's the thing that those things are still developing as well. That's a really fascinating thing for 20-year-old game.
Knowing that there's lots more to look forward to.
Yeah.
There was a question. Somebody wanted to know if there's anything you wish you knew before you started Tamriel Rebuild.
Yeah, and one of those things that, say, it isn't that much the case, because I did just learn so much in Tamriel Rebuild. It was part of the development process, and I did start out as sort of the how do you say? I really started out from the bottom, just contributing a few interiors and so on. I wasn't a lead developer until much later, and so I could also just afford that too, and that was no trouble for me to have basically no experience. I contributed where I could, and that worked out. But in general, there are just so many things you learn with the CS that make life easier once you're familiar with them. In a way, it would have, of course, been much nicer if I had those to start with, but it was actually nice learning it, and I think that's I enjoy that as well. It was a bit of the same reiterative approach of Tamriel Rebuild in general, that sometimes you're just going to look back at something you made before and said, wait, I could have made this much better. But I like that, because it's one of the few ways that I can comfort myself when the CS crashes, which it doesn't do much for me, and then the work gets lost. But usually when I rebuild it, it is a lot better. And I will say, one of the useful things is that there is a backup file, and it's called pubcab or whatever, which is written backwards.
That's what it is.
That's what it is.
I never knew that.
And if you change the ending of it, the sort of the file to be an ESP, and it will be an ESP file which you can then load and get your backup. That's useful. That's what I wish I knew.
Whoa! I never knew that. So you keep learning.
Yeah, but where it doesn't help is that I had this massive personal project that I was working on, where I was trying to make a continent, because of course it was. And then I was planning this large, at the start of the game, instead of the sort of the character generation in Morrowind, that you'd have this large dream sequence where you're wandering through a dream, and so now I was working away at that. It made this really complex space. I looked back at the exterior, some weird error had happened, and most of the exterior was wiped away. I'd been working on that dream sequence so long, my backups didn't go that far back.
Ouch.
So, the one thing is that there is that backup file, but, always keep backups, always basically save them off, and also don't just keep it on your hard drive. It's, put backups on a USB or external hard drive or something. There was, with the Project Tamriel, the sister project, there was early work done on Cyrodiil, and that was done largely by one person who had his laptop stolen and it got lost, and they had to start. So, keep backups, keep them everywhere. Just hide them off squirrel just put backups in places and.
If there's one thing you keep from today's is, okay, 3 things. Tamriel Rebuilt is really cool and you can contribute, go to the Discord, and keep backups of whatever you do.
Yes. Backups.
Really, really important. Yeah, I can't imagine, like there's so many mods that I made and then I lost them and I know I will never do it again. So it was too much.
Also, yeah. For me, there was one case where I was transferring to a new computer. I put all of my important files in USB, transferred it to the new computer, deleted it from the USB. Apparently the transfer didn't work. All gone. Oh yeah.
Ouch.
Back up.
Back up, guys. Back up. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. That was interesting, fun, and educational. I've learned things such as Tamriel Rebuilt is older than Morrowind. I'm doing a mind explosion. There's no video, so I'm telling you guys.
And I'll actually add that with the, I did talk quite a bit about Tamriel Rebuilt's history, but one of the interesting things is there's one of the developers for Tamriel Rebuilt, Sultan of Rum. He's really exploring the history of Tamriel Rebuilt in a lot of depth. And so if you go over to the Discord, there's a Historical Society channel.
Oh.
That's where he's also compiling his massive history, and it's I think over 100 pages already, of TR, where he just goes through the whole thing. And he's doing some impressive research there. And also Creonis, who was also a lead developer of TR, though he moved on and isn't contributing to it at the moment. But he also made a Google document tracking the different projects, also with Oblivion and so on, the different province mods. And that's also quite interesting with such an old project that you're starting to see these real historical research basically into Morrowind modding, TR modding.
We've come to a point where there's Morrowind, there's the history of Morrowind, and then there's projects and the history of those projects. Wow.
And it's fascinating. And I will say that's one of the other things to take from TR is that it's just really useful to look at and to, for example, read that history page, get an idea of, on the one hand, what to do if you want to do a similar project, but also what not to do. Because there are just so many mistakes that TR went through, that modders go through all of these things. And there's so much you can learn from it, and that's also a nice part of the community. That many people there try to do something similar and will tell you what worked out, what didn't.
Let's finish on a note about the future. What's the main? What is the TR team working on right now?
At the moment, TR is working on 2 areas, which both have alliterative titles. Nicely, there's the Dominions of Dust and there's the Embers of Empire.
Sounds epic.
So sounds good, and the content is as well, because Dominions of Dust is continuing. We had Old Ebonheart, then Antherin to the south of it. Now to the west is Dominions of Dust, which is a massive area. It'll be a very large release. And most of it is wilderness, but there's the town of Underthrun, which is very large, and a few other smaller towns. And so that just has a huge area. It has ashlands, it has a sort of main territory, and it goes all the way up to the it will go all the way up to the border of Morrowind, to the Vluthi Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing to look forward to, and has a lot of really good content lined up. As in largely in Underthrun, you get a lot of the factions, with the Imperial faction, but also House Lalo and so on. And then with Embers of Empire, that's actually returning to the older TR areas, and the snake eating its own tail, rebuilding some of them but improving them a lot. That it's mainly working on the Imperial settlements,
Mm-hmm.
so Firewatch, Helnum, and then the smaller ones. And it's basically an overhaul of the settlements. That the exteriors are different, the interiors also got redone and brought up to modern standards, and the quests are also currently being redone. And fortunately, I can't give concrete release dates, and that's with volunteer projects. As it said, it depends on much people are able to work, and sometimes they are burnt out, sometimes they don't have any inspiration, sometimes they're busy with their real lives, sometimes they suddenly just get a burst of energy and do a massive amount that nobody was expecting. And that's always the way of it, and of course, again, I always have to try and get the people to join the project, that if you join, it'll go, quicker.
It's true. You heard it, guys. You heard it. But yeah.
But those are just really far along the development. Embers of Empire will probably be released first, and hopefully this year, should be this year, but
give or take. On the Morrowind modding Discord, we have a little emoji that says 2090, and anytime Edward says, so when will it be published? 2090. That's the answer.
When people are delving into history, one of the fun things you just stumble over again, time and again, is people making predictions of when things will be released. Full Amalexia, released in 2010 or something. Yeah, that didn't happen. I'm sorry, it didn't happen.
Look, people are modders, not Nostradamus, I guess. We'll wait. We'll be patient, and I'm sure it's going to be a great new release. Looking forward to it, for sure.
And that thing there, it's always worth the wait, and that was also with the old Ebonheart release. It was held up due to a few quest lines that were being worked on, in particular the Thieves Guild quest line. But still, basically, so many people come into the TR Discord saying they played that quest line, it was amazing, and it was really worth waiting for it, and that I think it's definitely worth taking a bit long to really then get something really good people can enjoy.
Happy to wait, especially if at the end of the day we have fun playing, then it definitely is worth it. And I remember now, I wanted to ask you roughly, because I know it's hard to say, but how many active people in Tamriel rebuilt?
Yeah, that is very hard to say. I tend to say that it feels like about 24 people usually, but it's always hard to tell because there's some people who, for example, just aren't so active in Discord, but just plug away at interiors or other work on the forums. And also we now have a lot of interaction with the sister project, Project Tamriel, and so a lot of people, if you complete a showcase for one, you automatically can become a developer for the other as well. So there are a lot of people who just hop between projects, and there are things they want to work on, all of those things, and a lot of people, like a lot of modelers who are there, who provide tips, who might not be working on models for TR at the moment, because all of the modelers basically have massive backlogs of things to work on. They're very high demand. But yeah, it's very active in the Discord at the moment. And I think with the Discord, there are quite a lot of active people in general that aren't necessarily working on PR, but it's quite a large community actually.
Like to hear that. Large community, active, and making our favorite game even better. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention? I know we covered a lot of things.
Were there any other questions for me I want to ask?
Oh, somebody, but that was a weird question. I was a bit confused. Somebody, and I'm going to pull it up so I say it right. Somebody asked, did you ever fix up that Citroën 2CV?
Yes, okay. Now, it's not an actual Citroën that I have, I'm sorry to say. That's actually going back to TR history with Atrionis. He joined, he was sort of part of the TR community for quite a long time, but he was mostly on the IRC, which was before Discord, sort of chat forum. And there was the... see, when I came in, that I know was working on peers and so on, and with the Hammerfall project. Then I went on a hiatus from TR for a while. Then I came back, and that's when I then, got a bit involved in the project again, and that's sort of when I started to go up and become a lead. And that was a very turbulent time because TR was once again sort of reinventing itself at the time. And so it decided to restructure the way that the project worked. The thing is, that time is now called the Great Self-Decapitation, because a lot of TR's leadership disappeared. And so I had just recently become a lead, and then I ended up being one of the few left. And so then, but we were still quite ambitious. From the sort of restructure, there were ideas of what TR wanted to do. And so we had these very ambitious ideas, and then Atreus came in and said, and was obvious that we were being over-ambitious. And so then he basically wrote a long, quite aggressive post on the forum, where he was saying that we were like people who were planning a road trip with a Citroën CV, which had broken down at the gas station. Then we were constantly just tinkering with it and thinking, oh wait, we can actually make this improvement to it, and oh, we can do this other thing. We end up just tinkering on it and never getting to the location. Then we think, oh, actually, we can go to the other location. We can cross the Mediterranean Sea instead. We can add floats to it, all of these things. We never end up reaching a destination. And so unfortunately, no, we're still building up the car. We're still stuck in the gas station, but that there are a lot of releases coming out that people can enjoy.
That's what it is. Okay. But you know what? I'm slightly offended because Citroën 2CVs is a very, very sturdy car. You could go all around the world with it if you want to. And I hope that's what Tamriel Rebuilt is going to do. Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on the Discord. I would love to contribute, but I'm having such a hard time finishing my own mods.
Yes, yeah, I know. And what I will say though is that there are also a lot of other people who are, quite busy and can't contribute so well. But it's, it's really, not a problem. Even if you do contribute, if you only sort of do something, once and then are gone for months or whatever. But it's the way with TR. People have their own lives and all of those things, and we don't expect people, we're not paying people. We don't expect people to, be releasing things.
You signed up for life.
Exactly. But, that's all no problem.
Well, good to know. Good to know. I hope a lot of people will be inspired to, not only play TR, but also be part of it. Be part of the history. In 20 years, when they go to the history channel, they can read about themselves.
There are TR members who were born after Tamriel Rebuilt was started.
Yeah.
And there are TR members who now have children who are old enough to contribute to the project itself and all those things. So
it's a never-ending story. For the best. We don't want it to end. Thank you once again for sharing all of this with us, and talk to you soon.
It was nice. Bye.